Welcome back to educator.com. Today we're going to go over the full-length multiple choice exam that's found on the College Board website. So let's get right down to the 60 questions and let's get you that 5 on the AP exam that you deserve here. All right, so question number 1 actually deals with production possibilities frontier. So question number 1 is dealing with missiles and steel, and what's going to cause the production possibilities to shift outward. So very quick sketch here. So you have steel and you have missiles. So if you have a production possibilities frontier, what's going to cause the production possibilities frontier to extend outward? And the answer is E. So efficiency and steel process. Okay, so if you increase any type of land, labor, and capital, it's going to shift the production possibilities frontier outward. Question number 2, dealing with nominal versus real. This is a straightforward question that deals with nominal versus real here. So if you memorize the equation, 2 should be no problem at all here. So you know that real interest rate equals the nominal interest rate minus inflation here. Now in this particular problem, the nominal gross domestic product grew by 11%, so you have 11% right here, and the real gross domestic product grew by 4%. So here, I know I put interest rate here, but you know what? I'm going to change this here. This is a true statement, so I'm not going to erase it here, but I'm going to revise this here to real GDP equals the nominal GDP minus inflation. So it works just the same here, except here the nominal GDP grew by 11% and the real GDP grew by 4%. So basically they're asking what is the rate of inflation? So 11 minus what equals 4%? So the answer is 7%. And the answer here is B. B, 7%. Okay, question number 3. Which of the following is an example of structural unemployment? When a computer programmer volunteers to leave his or her job, that's frictional unemployment. If you lose your job because of a severe recession, that's not a good thing, it's cyclical. If a construction worker decides, he can't find a job, then that's seasonal. And someone who is employed but is unproductive, that person is still employed, not unemployed. So the answer is going to be C. So auto worker replaced by robot. So that is structural unemployment. Okay, question number 4 deals with what's gonna happen if there's a large increase in labor productivity. Then what's going to happen to the real GDP and what's going to happen to the price level here. So let's take a look here at question number 4. How is that going to look on a graph here? So you have the SRAS and you have the aggregate demand. Here you have the price level. So let's say you have the price level here and you have the RGDP here. So what you have here is the SRAS shifting to the right. So here's SRAS 2. And you have Y1, Y2. And you have PL1 and PL2. So what happened to the price level? The price level decreased and the real GDP went to the right or increased. So the answer is going to be B, which is increase our GDP and decrease the price level. So the answer here is B for this particular problem. Number 5, what's going to increase the value of the spending multiplier? Well, the answer, remember, the spending multiplier is going to be 1 over MPC. So remember, this is a spending multiplier. So again, a quick review here. And the tax multiplier is going to be MPC over 1 minus MPC. So this is a tax multiplier. Okay, so let's assume that the spending multiplier, let's say the MPC equals 0.5. If that's the case, 1 over 1 minus 0.5 equals 2. So the spending multiplier is 2. If the MPC increases, let's say to 0.8, 1 over 1 minus 0.8 is going to equal 1 over 0.2, which equals 5 here. So what I did is I increased the spending multiplier, and I increased the marginal propensity to consume, and the spending multiplier increased. So the answer is D, the MPC. Okay. Question number 6. 6 deals with the Keynesian model. Okay, how are you going to increase the aggregate demand here? So again, the Keynesian model here, when you have the real GDP and you have the price level, what's one way that you can increase the aggregate demand here? Now again, you have Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. Again, discount rate deals with the monetary policy. Decreasing unemployment is going to lower consumption. Decreasing government expenditure is going to lower the GDP as well. And again, any type of decrease in spending, so C, D, and E are wrong. B, that's also going to decrease, and it's a wrong type of policy. So increase in autonomous investment is going to increase the aggregate demand here. So the answer is A. Increase in autonomous. I can't spell this correctly here. Autonomous investment. Okay, here. So the answer is A. So that is question number 6. Question number 7. Let's move on to question number 7. We're done with 10% of this exam here. Okay, the graph shows the equilibrium for a closed economy. If government spending results in F from E, what's going to happen? So basically, the real GDP increases from 1,000 to 1,500. So basically, what happened here? How do you get that $500 increase? Curious. And again, if you go through all the numbers here, how do you get the $500 increase here? And the answer is going to be B, because the reason why B, government spending, is $100, and with the multiplier being 5, multiplier by 5, when you multiply that together, you get an increase in $500. It's actually that simple. A, you're going to get $1,500 increase. C, you have government spending and consumption spending. You don't know what the multiplier is. Government spending and gross domestic product increased by 500. That's not going to do it. And E doesn't work as well. So knowing that the multiplier is 5 and government spending is 100, that's going to yield the correct answer. So question number 8. Okay, how can banks create money? Banks are in the business of lending out money. How are they actually creating money? And the answer is they lend excess reserves here. So E, lend excess reserves. Again, what's the takeaway from this here? If a bank takes $100,000 in deposits, and let's say the reserve ratio is 10%, they're required to hold on to $10,000. And so they have $90,000 of excess reserves that they lend out. And so they create money that way. So if they held on to all that money, deposits, no money would be created. But if they lend out all $900,000, you repeat the process, and money is actually created by lending out excess reserves. So the answer for number 8 is E. Number 9, so reserve requirement, another reserve requirement is going to be 20%, so 0.20. So if there's $100 worth of excess reserves, then what is the maximum amount of money supply? Now, there are going to be leaks in the system. Some people might actually just hold on to it in cash, but let's assume that this process repeats itself. Well, the very simple formula is 1 over RRR times the deposit here. So in this case, it's 1 over 5. So the multiplier is actually going to be 1 over 0.2 times 100. So that $100 excess is actually going to create $500 increase in money supply. So the answer is D, $500. Okay, number 10 is going to be another Federal Reserve question. So you have 3 consecutive Federal Reserve questions. So this should be a clue to you that, yes, I have to study the Federal Reserve in order to get a 5 on this AP exam. If the Fed is going to lower the reserve requirement, okay, so lower the RRR, that's going to be an increase in money supply. So this is expansionary. So this is expansionary monetary policy. So EXP, expansionary monetary policy. So this is not going to cause imports to rise. Exports are going to rise. Rate of savings, that's not going to increase the rate of savings. Unemployment and inflation, they're both not going to increase. Unemployment is actually probably going to decrease. But with the lower interest rates, with the lower reserve, more money supply, as a result, businesses are definitely going to purchase more factories and equipment. So businesses purchase factories plus equipment. Okay, so the answer number 10 is going to be D. Okay, question number 11. All right, so this is a money and banking question, so very similar to a Federal Reserve type question here. If people want to hold on to more money, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to banks? So this is a little bit more of a logic. It does help if you know the money market graph, but this is more, okay, people hold on to more money. Well, guess what? If they hold on to more money, banks are going to basically have less money to lend out and less money to lend out. So the answer is going to be E. So less credit expanded by banks. So anytime people hold on to cash, anytime banks don't lend out more money, there's less credit, and as a result, there's going to be a slowdown in economic activity as a result. Okay, question number 12. Keynesian theory, decreasing taxes and increasing government spending. What's going to happen to consumption, expenditures, and unemployment? This one's very straightforward. So expansionary fiscal policy. Okay, there's 2 basic ways of doing this here, and you have lower taxes or increased government spending. Now, really, the third way, if you actually look at it, is increased government transfers. This is basically another way of saying lowering taxes because you're kind of giving more money to people. Now, when that happens, when there's expansionary fiscal policy, what ends up happening is that consumer expenditures increase as a result, right? Because they have more money, and so they're going to spend more of the newfound money. I mean, that's what a rational person would do. And unemployment, well, if there's more money circulating, the economy does better, GDP increases, and unemployment goes down. So the answer is going to be C. Consumption increases and unemployment rate actually goes down for that particular problem here. Okay, number 13. What's going to most likely cause a severe recession? So this is kind of interesting because this is a combination of knowing expansionary plus fiscal policy. Okay, so what are the bad things? What are the politically not expansionary, but monetary and fiscal policy? What are the contractionary aspects here? So if you raise the discount rate, okay, if you raise the Fed funds rate, which is another way of saying really selling government securities. And then if you raise the required reserve ratio. And then fiscal policy, if you raise taxes, because that's always no fun. If you lower government spending, or if you lower transfer payments, right? So any combination of these is going to let a recession get worse here. So buy securities, that's wrong. Actually, these are the bad things here. So this is contractionary. So the question is actually asking what's going to cure a recession here. That actually makes more sense. You probably don't want to make it worse here. So expansionary is going to be the opposite here. So expansionary monetary and fiscal, what are the good things? You lower the discount rate. You lower the Fed funds. Or you buy government securities. And then you either lower the required reserve ratio. And then for fiscal, it's just basically the opposite of what you have here. So expansionary, this is the monetary. And here's the fiscal. You lower taxes. You raise government spending, or you raise transfer payments. So any of these combinations here is going to, cure a recession, or this is a standard way that the government is going to attack a bad economy. And so A, B, or C, if you look at open market operations, that could possibly answer. And then increased taxes doesn't work, so it's either B or C. And then increased government spending works, so the answer is going to be B, which is a combination of the following. Buy government securities, right here. Decrease taxes, right here. And increase government spending. So the answer here is going to be B. Okay. Question number 14. Let's go right down. Dig into this exam here. You got to pace yourself. You got to do 60 questions in 70 minutes. So I think I should be able to do the examples in that amount of time. But you got to be able to pace yourself. And if one problem is giving you too much difficulty, might make sense to move on to the next problem. Take a guess. Okay. If the economy is at full employment, President says that he's going to cut government debt in 4 years by increasing taxes and reducing government expenditure. So this is going to be probably a very unpopular president temporarily. So when they lower government expenditures and raise taxes, this is what's going to happen here. So let me go a little bit more in depth than the question actually requires here. So here's Y, or our GDP, and here's a price level. So let's say a presidential candidate comes in and tries to be responsible by balancing the budget here. So SRAS. I mean, you really have to admire a president with that type of ambition, but basically Keynes would say, well, you're at full employment here, so you're at LRAS here. Now, if you do any of those two, if you do a combination of the two, then you're gonna have a problem here, because the aggregate demand is going to decrease. So AD1 now turns to AD2 as a result, Y2, and PL2 as a result. The price level goes down, the GDP goes down, and therefore the unemployment is going to go up. Again, keep in mind, the relationship between real GDP and unemployment are inversely related. So the answer to this problem is going to be A, unemployment. So yes, it might be a responsible thing to possibly balance the budget, reduce the government debt, but in the process, you're going to kill a lot of jobs. Okay, question number 15 here. Protecting high-cost domestic producers. So if you have a tariff and you impose that on countries that are trying to import their goods into the United States, then what's going to happen? There's not going to be a decrease in domestic production. You're saving it. You're supposedly saving the industry. So 1 and 2 are mutually exclusive. So 2 is correct. and there's not going to be increase in foreign output of the good because you're restricting output. So the only answer is 2, which is B. So again, tariffs are meant to protect. So the answer is 2, which is increase domestic production. Okay, and again, the takeaway here is tariffs protect, and I'm going to put this in quotation marks, tariffs protect infant domestic industry. Most economists are generally not in favor of tariffs. The Hawley-Smoot tariff, it's widely acknowledged in 1929. The Hawley-Smoot tariff served to actually worsen and make it so that the Great Depression had a rippling effect where other countries in turn raised their tariffs and there's less economic activity. Okay, question number 16. If 2 countries are producing and they specialize, what's the most likely result? And this one is comparative advantage without doing any math here. Is just understanding that trade makes both countries better off. So both countries are better off simply because if you do something in which you have comparative advantage. So why am I doing this lecture here? And why is it that you aren't filming this econ lecture? And really the reason has nothing to do with absolute advantage. Okay, it really has to do with comparative advantage. What am I giving up versus what are you giving up by filming? So again, this not only deals with trade, but why anyone does anything. It has to do with a lower opportunity cost and comparative advantage. So that's really the heart of economic theory, both in micro and macroeconomics. Okay, question number 17. Let's get to 17 here. Which following means of reducing military spending is going to do the most for gross domestic product? And the answer here is C, closing overseas bases and relocating in U.S. Okay, good thing here to know, the good takeaway here, GDP is the final, is not the final, but the value of final goods and services produced within a country's borders. So the reason why C is the correct answer has to do with the location. So if you close the overseas bases and you bring them into the United States, then you're going to increase the U.S. GDP as a result here. Okay, question number 18. According to the aggregate supply and demand graph shown above, what's going to decrease output for sure? Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of sketch this graph here. So you have the RGDP, and you have the price level here, and aggregate demand here, and aggregate supply. So this is, yes, it's with the real GDP, but if you have a basic understanding of supply and demand, PL1 is right here, and you know that the real GDP is right here. How do you get the output to decrease and the price level to decrease as well? Well, there's only one that will have both effect, but actually the question is asking what is going to decrease the output, okay? And so there's only 2 ways here. So if you decrease the supply right here, aggregate supply, a leftward shift in the aggregate supply, and a leftward shift in the aggregate demand, so the answer therefore is going to be E, which is 2, and 2 is a leftward shift of aggregate demand. The price level would go down as well here, and also a leftward shift of the aggregate supply, which would be an aggregate supply curve. The price level would increase here. So E, which is 2 and 4. Okay, let's move on to question number 19 right here. 19. What's going to result in the greatest increase in aggregate demand? All right, so increasing aggregate demand, fiscal policy. Okay, so fiscal policy, increasing aggregate demand is basically expansionary. Okay. So again, this is a concept that's been gone over a couple of times here, but expansionary monetary policy deals with interest rates, discount rate, buying government securities, selling government securities. So that's what monetary policy is. Expansionary fiscal policy deals with lowering taxes, again, lowering taxes and increasing government spending. Okay, now if you had to choose between one or the two, what is the more effective? The Keynesian theory asserts that increasing government spending. Why? When you lower taxes, people are going to save some of it, so you don't have the full impact that government spending has. So the multiplier effect is greater when you increase government spending. Again, that being said, what's going to cause an increase, the greatest increase in aggregate demand? And that would be E, which would be $100 increase plus $100. So this is government spending, $100 decrease in taxes. So the answer 19 is going to be E. Again, B is going to help out, C is going to help out, and even D is going to help out, but E has the greatest impact on increasing the aggregate demand. Okay, question number 20. We are a third of the way through this AP exam. Okay, number 20. If the economy is in a severe recession, what's the most effective means for stimulating production here? And again, these choices actually makes it pretty interesting. D and E deals with monetary, government spending decreasing and increasing income taxes. It's not going to be the answer. So by default, it's got to be A. So government spending increases. Now, what's kind of interesting, if question 20 said government spending increases or taxes decreases, both of them are going to help out and stimulate the economy. But from a Keynesian viewpoint, it's the government spending that increases that's going to have the bigger impact on the economy. Okay, question 21 here. So if the marginal propensity to consume increases, what's going to happen to the equilibrium level of income and the equilibrium level of consumption here? So if the MPC is going to increase here, so let's assume that the MPC is 0.5, and let's say it increases to 0.8 here. Well, the multiplier here is going to be 1 over 1 minus MPC, which is going to be 1 over 1 minus 0.5 equals 2. Now, if you increase the multiplier, 1 or the marginal propensity to consume, then you're actually increasing the multiplier here from 2 to 5 as a result. So what happens to the income? Well, the income is going to definitely increase because the real GDP increases. And as a result of the increase in income, then the consumption is also going to increase. So the answer here is going to be D, which is both are going to increase as a result of the increased economic activity here. Okay, question number 22 here. If private investment, $100 is added to the economy, okay, what's going to happen to the equilibrium level of consumption and income and consumption? Same thing here. So if you add $100, then income is also going to increase here. So GDP increases, so the equilibrium level of income increases. And as a result, consumption also increases as well. So really, number 21 and 22 are asking pretty much identical things. So the answer here for 22 is going to be B. Okay. Number 23, let's go ahead and move on to number 23 here. The real value of the US dollar is determined by which of the following here. So you're trying to figure out, as dealing with federal regulations, gold backing the dollar. Remember, we have a fiat currency, so that can't be the answer. It's not really the money multiplier. That's not how much money is injected. And marginal propensity to consume, that's the portion of the income that you're actually spending. So kind of by process of elimination, it's goods and services that is bought. So really the real value of why a dollar is, how much can it actually purchase? So that's kind of the real value of what a dollar is really all about. Okay, question number 24. Demand for money increases when the national income increases. And again, this is kind of one of those things that's kind of self-explanatory. So demand for money increases when national income increases. And really it's self-explanatory because the spending on goods and services goes up as well. So you have more money, so your demand for money is going to increase because, you know, the price level has increased, and so therefore you're going to have an increased demand for actual money. Okay, number 25 here. Aggregate supply being horizontal over a certain range here. Now, let me put a caveat to this. This is a little bit of an older exam, so you probably won't see a question exactly like this, but the principle still remains the same here. So if you have the aggregate supply curve here that is horizontal, so let's say this is a short run aggregate supply curve, price level here, and YGDP. Okay. Because within that range, for aggregate demand to work here, aggregate demand changing the aggregate demand curve, it works here because the whole idea is that changing the aggregate demand is going to stimulate the economy because resources are underemployed. When you're dealing with a vertical, long-run aggregate supply curve, then you're going to see the aggregate demand not being as effective. So the answer is E. Okay, number 26. If the Fed wishes to use monetary policy to reinforce Congress's fiscal policy changes, then it should do which of the following? Okay, so when the goal is to stimulate the economy, if you want to use expansionary monetary policy, then you probably want to use expansionary fiscal policy and vice versa. So the answer here is going to be A. It just works out. You increase the money supply and increase government spending. These are both expansionary, so the answer is A. B is incorrect because one's expansionary monetary, one's expansionary fiscal or contractionary fiscal. C is expansionary fiscal, but contractionary monetary. D is contractionary monetary and expansionary fiscal. And E is expansionary monetary and contractionary fiscal. So I went over this. Make sure you understand what expansionary and contractionary fiscal and monetary policy options are and be able to reconcile the differences. Okay, so 26 is going to be A. Okay, 27. So what relationship is established in the short run Phillips curve? And remember, in the long run, there is no relationship, but in the short run here, so here's unemployment rates, and here's inflation rates, and here's a short run Phillips curve here. And so the relationship is there's an inverse relationship. So the answer that comes the best there is a decrease in inflation rate usually is increased by the rate of unemployment, increase in unemployment. So answer is B. Again, this is in the short run. In the long run, there's no such relationship. They have no relationship, but in the short run, that is the answer. So the answer is B. Okay. All right, number 28. Let's go through number 28 here. 28 deals with unemployment and inflation here. So what could cause simultaneous increases in inflation and unemployment? And really, it has to do with MV equals PY here. So if the price level goes up here, price level goes up, and there's an increase in inflationary expectations as well, then that's going to increase the price level here, and so inflation goes up. And if there's an increase in inflationary expectations as well, then what ends up happening is that the prices are going up, and as a result, you kind of get a stagnating economy. So what you end up happening here is that D, this increase in inflationary expectations is going to cause the increase in both inflation and unemployment. Okay. Whereas A, decrease in government spending, that's going to decrease inflation. It's going to decrease or increase unemployment. Decrease in money supply, that's also going to decrease the inflation. A decrease in the velocity of money, again, that's gonna lower inflation as well. Increase in the overall level of productivity, it's going to increase inflation, but it's also going to lower unemployment. So even by a process of elimination, this might be the answer if it doesn't immediately jump at you. So again, I'm trying to not only teach you economics, but some test-taking strategies for the AP Macro exam here. Okay, number 29, if all things are held constant, what are an increase in U.S. imports? So more imports are coming in, then what's going to happen? Okay, and the idea here is, okay, so more and more imports are going to come in. So the reason why is what's going to happen is that the market is going to be quantity of dollars here. So let's say world currency to dollar. And you have the exchange rate here. Here's E1 here. And let's call this M1 here. Okay, so you have the supply of currency and demand for currency. What's going to happen is that the world supply of the dollar is going to rise because you're going to use dollars to buy these imports. So supply of dollars is going to increase here. S2 here. As a result, there's going to be flooding of U.S. currency, and the exchange rate goes down. So the dollar depreciates here. And so the answer here is D. So there's going to be a depreciated dollar because of the flood of supply of dollars. Okay, question number 30. Right, halfway through the exam here. Okay, so increase in which of the following is an improved standard of living? So this one doesn't really require any graphs here. It's really the productivity of labor here. So anytime you're more productive, if you can find more efficient ways of doing things, I mean, this is just more of a common sense thing. You know, before the invention of the light bulb, I'm sure it was very difficult to get work done. Before the invention of a car, airplane transportation was a little bit difficult. You guys might be watching this. You're more productive because you're able to get this tutoring in, and watching educator.com, that's increased your productivity. So these are things that as labor becomes more productive, you can get tutoring without any physical person being there with you. You can just type in what you want to be tutored in, and this productivity has allowed you to spend more time with leisure. Okay, question number 31. The long-run aggregate supply curve is going to shift right when which of the following happens. And again, if you think about it, question number 30, what increases standard of living? Well, increase in productivity. Well, the LRAS increases, and that's going to cause there to be a higher standard of living. So this one it's kind of confusing that would be right next to each other, because essentially it's saying the same thing. So increase in productivity is going to be the result when the LRAS shifts to the right. So the answer is B here. Okay. Number 32, what does the CPI measure? The Consumer Price Index. And so again, it's a change in weighted goods. In weighted prices of a basket of goods. Okay, so what is the CPI? So CPI is the most probably common measure of inflation. What it does is you take like a carton of milk, you take some loaves of bread, and you compare the price over time. And generally in the United States, you've seen inflation maybe 2 to 3% every year, where milk, bread, a basket of goods might cost $100, and next year it's $102, and so on and so forth. And so this is probably the most common popular way to measure the rate of inflation in the United States. Okay, question number 33. what's true if you're producing at full level employment? Well, you know the unemployment rate, it's not going to be zero because there's always going to be some level of unemployment. There still is unemployment at full employment, so some will be receiving unemployment compensation. Government's budget, it could be balanced, it could be a deficit, not necessarily related. Balance of trade doesn't necessarily have to be in equilibrium here. So there's going to be frictional unemployment. Again, frictional unemployment would be if you voluntarily quit your job, and again, that's the type of unemployment that is fairly healthy for an economy to have here. Okay, question 34, classical economic analysis. Remember, John Maynard Keynes, he famously postulated in the long run, we're all dead. Now, John Maynard Keynes, again, he was a big critic of Keynesian philosophy, the idea that you just don't do anything, the idea that in the long run things will just kind of correct itself. Problem is, we don't know how long it's going to take. And so classical economic analysis says that the economy is self-correcting. Now again, there's a big divide here. Chances are, if you're watching this, you have Democrats and Republicans and Libertarians, and who knows, in the United States, there's a lot of debate as to, should we just let the economy, the markets regulate themselves, or is it the government's responsibility to step in? And if so, to what point? And again, this is a macro debate that will probably, rage on into the next century. Okay, question number 35. Okay, which of the following is going to result from decreased government spending? Went over this. There's going to be a decrease, a leftward shift of the aggregate demand here. So the aggregate demand, AD, is going to shift to the left right here, AD here. You're going to want to put the price level here, PL, and you're going to have a Y right here. So E is going to be a decrease in AD. Okay, question number 36. If the current equilibrium output is 2.5 million, potential is 2.6 million. Okay, so you're in a recessionary gap. Okay, so stop right there. A, decreasing taxes, that's possibility. Decreasing taxes, again. So the right prescription is either going to be decreasing taxes or increasing government spending here. But you know that the marginal propensity to consume is 0.75 here. So 0.75 here. Now the spending multiplier is going to be 1 over 1 minus MPC. Now the tax multiplier, so this is the spending multiplier. Now the tax multiplier is going to be MPC over 1 minus MPC. So to try to get that increase in $100,000, so MPC is 0.75. So if the MPC is 0.75, if you do 1 over 1 minus 0.75, then the multiplier is going to be 0.4. So that's a spending multiplier. Actually, I'm sorry, not 0.4. 1 over 0.25, which equals 4 here. So if you want to get an increase of $100,000, then you have to increase spending by 25,000, because 25,000 times 4 will get you the desired result of $100,000. So the answer is going to be C. Yeah. Again, the reason why you don't decrease taxes by $25,000 because you multiply MPC divided by 1 over MPC, and you're not going to get the same answer. So the tax multiplier is only going to be 75% of the 4. So you're not going to get that effect where when you spend directly, that's going to have a direct injection into the economy. Okay, question number 37. Okay, 37 deals with an inflationary gap. So what can the government do to close an inflationary gap? Again, seems like I've been repeating the same theme over this over the test here. So it's either contractionary fiscal or monetary policy is going to close inflationary gap. Now, increasing the supply of money, increasing government spending, decreasing discount rate, decreasing the reserve requirement, these are all things that's going to, those are expansionary fiscal and monetary. So the thing that will close a recessionary gap here, the answer is going to be C, which is increase taxes. Now, what are other things that can do it? Decrease government spending, increasing the federal funds rate, discount rate, raising the reserve requirements. That would be contractionary monetary policy. Okay, so if they're talking about fiscal policy, then it's increasing taxes. If they're talking about monetary policy, then it's the reserve requirements, discount rate, and basically, if it's a little nebulous, if they just say what can the government do, then you can assume that the answer can be either fiscal or monetary policy. Okay, number 38. Okay, the circular flow of the economy. Okay, so one of the things I have my students do is draw the circular flow. And basically, if you understand that, you're really not memorizing what's going on. You're just understanding that. Let me quickly draw the circular flow diagram. You have households and you have firms. And what do households do? They supply land, labor, and capital to firms. And in exchange, well, what ends up is firms, they sell goods and services, final goods and services, right? Now this here is going to be the physical flow. So this is the part of the economy that's the most important, the activities that are taking place. Now, what's going on the outside here is the monetary flow. So let's go ahead and do that here. So this is a monetary flow. Now, obviously for multiple choice tests, this is probably way too much information, but again, we're going over, you have the answers in front of you. I'm trying to give you a breakdown of how to actually attack this from a knowledge standpoint. Okay, so households are gonna make sales payments here. And this all takes place in the product market. Okay, now here the firms are going to buy making factor payments. And this all takes place, or income payments, in the factor market. So if you look at 38, is it households buy services from firms? No. Households, they sell factor services. So the answer is 2. 2 works because households sell factors. And 3, households buy output from firms. They buy goods and services. So households buy goods and services, so that's also correct. So households buy output. Now, do households sell output to firms? No. So the answer is D, which is 2 and 3. Okay, question number 39. 39, if the reserve ratio is 20%, so that's the RRR, and there's no excess reserve, so all the money is being lent out here, then what's going on here? If a $100 deposit from a new customer, the bank has excess reserves of what? All right, so $100, and again, there's no excess reserves there, so of which the bank can lend out $80. Okay, they're required to keep the $20 here. So the excess reserves, because they're not automatically going to lend out the money to begin with, is $80. So the answer is B. So again, that's really straightforward. You just have to know what the reserve ratio means for that. Okay, number 40. What's going to increase? What's most likely to increase if the public decides to increase its holdings of currency? All right, let's take a look. Here's the money market demand here. So here's the MD1, and here's the quantity of money And here is the nominal interest rate. And this is going to be here the money supply. So the money supply doesn't change here. But let's say there's an increase in the money demand. So currency increases here. MD2 here, let's focus on what happens to interest rate. Interest rates goes from R1 to R2. So the result, interest rates are going to go up. So the answer is A. Interest rates. So if suddenly there's a, if it's a case where there's an increased demand in currency, then the money demand shifts to the right and interest rates are going to increase. Okay, number 41. Okay. Number 41, during a mild recession. So during a recession, if policymakers want to reduce unemployment by increasing investments, then what is going to be the best policy? Now, here's the key. Increasing investment. So that's the goal. So a tempting answer might be B here. So B is if you increase government expenditures, then you know you're going to increase the aggregate demand. But in doing so, interest rates go up, and that actually discourages investment here. So let me show you the difference here. So expansionary, expansionary fiscal policy is going to have what's called the crowding out effect. So you have supply here, you have demand here. There's a quantity of loanable funds here, and then you have here the real interest rates. So if the government increases government spending, then you have an increase in the quantity of loanable funds. But the problem is interest rates are going to go up, and that discourages investment. So increasing government spending, while that in conjunction with another policy, if that's the only thing that you do, interest rates go up, and you have a discouraging of investment here. Whereas the money supply here, here's the money demand, MD1 here, and here's the money supply, and you have the interest rates here. If the Fed increases the money supply, interest rates go down. If interest rates go down, then what ends up happening here is that interest rates go down, consumption is going to go up, investment goes up as well. Okay, so the answer to number 41 is going to be E, purchase government securities or buying government securities. Okay. Question number 42. Okay, which of the following monetary and fiscal policies will decrease aggregate demand? Again, seems like I've gone over this pretty much ad nauseum here. Okay, number 42. Number 42 is going to deal with what happens that's going to cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the left here. So if you look at A and B, lowering the discount is not going to do it. So if you raise the discount rate, okay, that is going to shift the aggregate demand. So AD, shift to the left, absolutely. Selling bonds, so sell bonds. Sell bonds, again, the mnemonic would be shrink. Shrink will sell bonds, and that will also shift the aggregate demand to the left here. Buying bonds will bloat it and therefore shift the aggregate demand to the right. And again, decrease government spending. Decrease government spending. So that will also shift the aggregate supply to the left. So the answer is E. E has the combination of these three here. Raise the discount rate, sell bonds, and decrease government spending. And that's going to result in a decrease in aggregate demand. Okay, number 43. What's true of supply shocks? Okay, generally speaking. Well, a supply shock is when the supply curve is going to shift to the left, or aggregate supply. What's going to happen is that prices generally they change. So if there's a negative supply shock, prices are going to go up, both in absolute terms and relative terms. Absolute plus relative. So not only is the nominal, but from a real perspective, prices are going to go up. So the answer is going to be A. This is one of the questions where you might want to look at the other questions, and then you kind of realize that Okay, though they don't only affect the general price level. You can't necessarily anticipate and offset it. The vertical aspect to it, A is generally going to be the best answer. And again, the problem with the aggregate supply shift to the left, monetary policy, if you try to use that, then if you try to use fiscal or monetary policy, then you're either going to have the problem with inflation or unemployment. So it's hard to tackle something when something happens to the aggregate supply. Okay, number 44. Number 44, unemployment fell and inflation fell. So what caused this general decrease in the price level and an increase in the GDP? And, an easy answer is that the aggregate supply curve shifted to the right. So AS shifted to the right. And again, very simple way of looking at it here. So this is our GDP. And here's the aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply here. And here's the price level. So Y1, so when there's a shift to the right for the short run aggregate supply, SRAS2, then real GDP is going to increase here. And the price level here is going to go from PL1 to PL2. So the price level decreases. Now, it says the unemployment fell from 7.2 to 7.0%. So that's the unemployment. Now, don't get deceived right here. This is not the case where the real GDP is decreasing. If unemployment decreases, then the real GDP is presumably increasing. So this could be one of those questions where if you don't really read what's into the problem, then you think you might know the answer, but you gotta be careful and understand what the question is specifically asking for. Okay, question number 45. Okay, so question number 45 is going to deal with higher interest rates. So question number 45 here. In the U.S., there's higher interest rates, right? So very simple, money is going to want to flow into the U.S. Why? Because you have lower interest rates in the world. So people are self-interested. They're going to want higher returns on whatever the country may be. So the answer here is that the value of the dollar is gonna increase as a result. So money comes in, so the dollar goes up in value. As a result of the dollar going up in value, it becomes more expensive. So exports are going to decrease as well. So the answer here is B. And as a result, the aggregate demand is going to decrease as well. Okay, number 46. All right, so this one is kind of a tricky question because you're dealing with food and clothing and number of hours, and you have labor hours required. And this is probably one of the things that you learned early on in the semester. So you're like, oh, so many numbers here. So, but let me break it down to you to make it really easy here. So you have country, you have the country, you have the food, and you have clothing here. Okay, and so you have country X and you have country Y, and 20 hours is required to create 1 unit of clothing. 20 or 50 hours is used to create 1 unit of clothing, 1 unit of food in country X. 10 hours for country Y for food, and then 20 hours for country Y for clothing. Well, let's assume that there's only 50 hours. So I'm sure there's a way that you can do this using the input, but let's just turn the input into the output. So all 50 hours are used. So 1 clothing is going to be produced in country X if they allocate all the hours. Now, if they allocate all of it towards food, they make 2.5 foods. Okay, same thing in country Y. They can make either 5 foods because 50 divided by 10 equals 5 foods, or they can make 2.5 clothing. Okay, so now at this point, it's just an equality issue, sir. You know that 1 clothing equals 2.5 food in country X. Now in country Y, we know that 5 food equals 2.5 clothing, and let's divide by 2.5 on both sides here. And so now 1 clothing equals equals 2, one clothing equals 2 food. Now, what's more expensive here? Meaning that what's the lower opportunity cost? So one clothing requires 2.5 food in country X. One clothing equals 2 food. I'd rather make the clothing where it costs only 2 here. So comparative advantage in clothing is country Y. Okay, so the answer to answer number 46 is C. So once you figure that out, you really don't have to calculate. Then you know that the comparative advantage for country X is going to be food. So the answer is C. So this is kind of a long and drawn out problem, but it's one of those things where, oh, okay, it's mathematically correct. So there's probably different ways to tackle this. To me, I find this the easiest. Convert the input into the output and then come up with the answer. Okay, 47. Okay, inflation. Okay, who benefits from unanticipated inflation? Okay, so one of the things that you have to understand is that lenders, when they lend out, they kind of use the interest rate and to anticipate inflation, so to speak. So if inflation goes higher than expected, then the lenders are hurt. Banks are hurt from that situation here. So lenders and also savers. Savers, it eats away at the value. But if you borrow money and there's unexpected inflation, then you benefit here. So number 2, borrowers. So the answer is B only. So for you guys that are watching this, if you plan on taking a lot of college loans at low interest, yeah, you know, inflation might not actually be a bad thing for you, because if you borrow $100,000 for college and there's massive inflation, again, assuming that your wages also go up, then you have a situation where you're paying back the loan when it's worth less. Okay, number 48, an increase in labor force participation rate. What is that going to do? So let's say you have 100 million workers, and suddenly the labor force participation increases because now you have 150 million workers. Okay, chances are a lot of these workers are probably going to be unemployed. Okay, not necessarily, but what it does is that it makes it more difficult to reduce unemployment. Okay, it's just the law of large numbers. Once you have a huge chunk, it's gonna hard to make it where each and every labor force participator is going to be able to have a job. Not impossible, but this is one of those questions where you look at the other answers and you eliminate it, it's not one of the answers that just automatically that you know it's right. It's just through the process of elimination here. Okay, number 49. Which of the following is a key feature of macroeconomics or of Keynesian economics? And the idea is that D, so that the macro equilibrium can be less than full employment. Okay, again, there could be a recession, so there's a short-run equilibrium. Not in the long run, but in the short run, there could be the recession or there can be inflation. And again, if it's in recession, there's an equilibrium at less than full employment. Okay, number 50. If there's a large total increase in total spending and that has no effect on real GDP, it must be true that which of the following has happened here. All right, let's kind of take a look here. So if it's a case where, let's say this is the LRAS right here, and you have the aggregate demand. So spending, so aggregate demand increases, AD2. Guess what? There's no impact here on the GDP here, but what happened here? For sure, the price level went up. So it's just inflation that went up, so the answer is going to be A. So in this type of aggregate supply, you're not going to have a whole lot of impact when you try to use expansionary fiscal policy. Okay, number 51. Let's go ahead and go with 51. According to Keynesian theory, what's going to cause people to save and consume the most? And the answer is actually pretty intuitive here. Income. So level of income. So people have a marginal propensity to consume or a marginal propensity to save based on income. It does make sense. If you have $100,000, then chances are your consumption and savings decisions is based on the fact that you have that $100,000 in income. Now you can argue, well, it depends on one's wealth, but income is possibly considered to be a suitable proxy for wealth. Now it's possible that you have tons of wealth and no income, and you still are going to spend a lot of money. But I would say for the majority of the population, income is a fairly good indicator of wealth. Okay, number 52. 52 deals with the money supply. In which instance is increasing the money supply going to be effective here? So first of all, is it high or low? Okay, so in high or low interest rates, is increasing the money supply going to be more effective? Well, if it's already low, increasing the money supply isn't going to do as much effect as an environment of high interest rates, right? So in terms of interest rates, then it's environment of high. So it's either going to be A or B. So you eliminate C, D, or E. Okay, in terms of employment, let's look at either full or less than full. Okay, well, if you have full employment already, then when you try to add the money supply, it's really not going to do a whole lot to the GDP as much. So less than full. So you really don't even have to, go with business optimism, but under high business optimism, that's going to happen. So the answer here is going to be B. So this is a problem in which if you just knew about interest rates and employment, you don't really have to know about business optimism in order to get this right, because A and B, they're both high. Okay, number 53. Okay, large budget deficit. If the government decides to decrease expenditures and tax revenues by the same amount, then what's going to happen to output and interest rates here? So let's say taxes decrease by 100 mil, and let's say expenditures, government spending, go down by $100 million as well. What's going to happen to the output as a result? Okay, the output, definitely is going to go down here. So now, why the government would actually decrease taxes when there's a large budget deficit? I mean, that's one way of doing it. Usually, if there's a budget deficit, then you probably want to increase taxes. But here they said they're going to decrease taxes. So the output goes down. Now, what happens to interest rates as a result? Okay, this is kind of like the reverse crowding out effect here, if that makes any sense here. So you have the supply and you have the demand for loanable funds. This is quantity of loanable funds here. And this is a price level. And so this is Q1 right here. And this is going to be, this is not the price level here, but this is a real interest rate. Okay, so this is going to be R1 here. So when there's the crowding out effect, the demand for loanable funds is going to increase. Now, if there's the opposite, then what's going to happen is that the demand for loanable funds is going to decrease because there's less government spending. So that's why I say there's a reverse crowding out effect. That's not official terminology, but the interest rates are also going to decrease as well. So the answer is going to be E. Output decreases. And also interest rates are going to also decrease because of this reverse crowding out effect. Okay, we're almost there. 54. Let's deal with number 54. If crowding out, which is an increase in the demand for loanable funds, if it only partially offsets the effects of a tax cut, then what's going to happen to the interest rates as a result? So the crowding out is going to cause interest rates to go up. Okay, so the answer is going to be A. Interest rates are going to go up. And again, that tax cut, what you have is that GDP is also going to go up as well. Okay, question number 55. All of the following are components of the money supply. Well, this one, find the ones that are correct, and then the ones that are incorrect, that's the answer here. So paper money, absolutely. 20 bucks, 30 bucks, or 20 bucks, $10, $100. It's all part of the money supply. Checkable deposits, absolutely. Checks, coins, that's just as good as money. And demand deposits. These are all part of the money supply. What is not part of the money supply? It's gold bullion. Okay, so gold is not part of the money supply. We have a fiat currency. Gold can be traded on the open market, but again, that's not part of the money supply. Okay, number 56. Again, you have a graph that you see in front of you, and that is a recessionary gap. Why? Because the long run aggregate supply is to the right of the short run equilibrium here. So the short run equilibrium is where the short run and the aggregate demand cross, and that's going to be 0B. So again, that's the short run. So the short run here is going to be the following here. So you have the SRAS, and then you have the aggregate demand, and you have the RGDP, and you have the price level. Okay. Now, this is the long run LRAS here, and basically what they want you to understand here is, you know, this, and this here. What does this all mean here? So if this is 0, this is A, B, and C. Well, the short run equilibrium here, this is so if this is Y1 here, then the equilibrium, short run equilibrium is 0B. Whereas the long run equilibrium, where is that going to be here? And what's going to happen is the SRAS is going to shift to the right here. And in the long run, what's going to happen here is Y2 is going to be 0A in the long run and 0B in the short run. Okay, so the answer is going to be B. Okay, 57, question number 57. Okay, according to both monetarists and Keynesians, what's going to happen when the Federal Reserve reduces the discount rate here? So you have the money market graph here. So this is the quantity of money. And you have one of two things that can happen here. So here's the money demand, and here's the money supply. Let's make it green here. So when the Fed, and this is nominal interest rates, okay, when the Fed reduces the discount rate, it decreases, in essence, it's going to decrease the money supply. I'm sorry, when it reduces the discount rate, it's going to increase the money supply because banks are going to lend out more and therefore increase the money supply. So the MS increases from MS1 to MS2. Interest rates go from R1 to R2 as a result. So as a result, the market, the supply of money increases and interest rates go down, and that's exactly what C is saying. And so the answer is C. Okay. Number 58, 3 more questions, the final page that you have. 58, an increase in which of the following is going to increase long-term, long-run growth of real GDP per capita. And so basically what's important here is it going to be population, not necessarily, proportion of GDP consumed, is the supply of money. Money, again, is kind of neutral in the long run, and income taxes actually hurts. So the answer is really education. Educational attainment here. Again, if you didn't particularly know this is one of these common sense things. What's going to cause people's standard of living to go up? You learn economics. You go to school, and it's going to increase a country's standard of living here. Okay, number 59. Increase in money supply will have the greatest effect on real GDP if which of the following happens here. And the answer, this one's kind of tricky here. So D, I'll go over the answer and then explain why. The quantity demanded is not sensitive to interest rates. Problem is, if the quantity of money demanded is sensitive to interest rates, if you increase the supply of money, then you can make the argument that if the amount of money that people hold is really dependent on interest rates, then in high interest rates, then people are not necessarily going to be in a situation where the money supply has the greatest effect. Whereas if the quantity of money is kind of not sensitive to interest rates, so people don't necessarily make decisions based on that, then an increase in money supply is going to have more of this multiplier effect. So that's answer number 59. Okay, and the final answer, number 60, we've made it through here. If the Federal Reserve wants to lower interest rates, how's that going to have an impact on international capital flows? So, okay, let's kind of take this logically. Interest rates, let's say in the US, is 6%. Okay, in the world, it's also 6%. Okay, now if they reduce interest rates, now there's two ways to reduce interest rates. If they decrease government spending, or if they increase the money supply. So either expansionary, what will reduce, so expansionary monetary policy, or contractionary fiscal policy. Okay, so what's going to happen is the interest rates, let's say, go down to, let's be extreme here, 1%. Okay, then what's going to happen to the investors here? Investors are going to look at that 1% and they're going to say, wow, we're going to send our money to the world where the interest rates are 6% here. So the international, at least in the short run, capital outflows go up, and conversely, capital inflows go down. So the answer is going to be D here. So D here is where the short run capital inflows to the US decrease. Thank you for watching educator.com.